And here I am on the battlefield of Franklin, right outside of the Carter House. And I'd like to read to you what Sam Watkins has to say about the horrible battle at Franklin. Franklin, the death angel gathers its last harvest. Kind reader, right here my pen and courage and ability fail me. I shrink from the butchery. Would to God I could tear the page from these memoirs and from my own memory. It is the blackest page in the history of war of the lost cause. It was the bloodiest battle of modern times in any war. It was the finishing stroke to the independence of the Southern Confederacy. I was there. I saw it. My flesh trembles and creeps and crawls when I think of it today. My heart almost ceases to beat at the horrid recollection. Would to God that I had ever witnessed such a scene. I cannot describe it. It beggars description. I will not attempt to describe it. I could not. The death angel was there to gather its last harvest. It was the grand coronation of death. Would that I could turn the page, but I feel, though I did so, that page would still be there, teeming with its scenes of horror and blood. I can only tell you what I saw. Our regiment was resting in the gap of a range of hills in plain view of the city of Franklin. We could see the battle flags of the enemy waving in the breeze. Our army had been depleted of its strength by a forced march from Spring Hill, and stragglers lined the road. Our artillery had not yet come up and could not be brought into action. Our cavalry was across the Harpeth River, and our army was but in poor condition to make an assault. While resting on this hillside, I saw a courier dash up to our commanding general, B.F. Cheatham, and the word, "Attention!" was given, and I knew then that we would soon be in action. Forward march! We passed over the hill and through a little skirt of woods. The enemy were fortified right across the Franklin Pike in the suburbs of the town. Right here in these woods, a detail of skirmishers was called for. Our regiment was detailed. We deployed as skirmishers, firing as we advanced on the left of the Turnpike Road. If I had not been a skirmisher on that day, I would not be writing this today in the year of our Lord, 1882. It was 4 o'clock on that dark and dismal December day when the line of battle was formed and those devoted heroes were ordered forward to strike for their altars and their fires, for the green graves of their sires, for God and their native land. As they marched on down through an open field toward the rampart of blood and death, the Federal batteries began to open and mow down and gather into the garner of death as brave and good and pure spirits of the world ever saw. The twilight of the evening had begun to gather as a precursor of the coming blackness of midnight darkness that was to envelop a scene so sickening and horrible that it's impossible for me to describe it. Forward, men, as repeated all along the line. A sheet of flame was poured into our very faces, and for a moment we halted as if in despair as the terrible avalanche, shot and shell laid low those brave and gallant heroes whose bleeding wounds attest that the struggle would be desperate. Forward, men. The air loaded with death-dealing missiles. Never on this earth did men fight against such terrible odds. It seemed that the very elements of heaven and earth were in one mighty uproar. Forward, men! And the blood spurts in perfect jet from the dead and wounded. The earth is red with blood. It runs in streams, making little rivulets as it flows. Occasionally, there was a little lull in the storm of battle as the men were loading their guns, and for a few moments, it seemed as if night tried to cover the scene with her mantle. The death angel shrieks and laughs, and old Father Time is busy with his sickle as he gathers in the last harvest of death, crying, "More, more, more," while its rapturous maw is glutted with the slain. But the skirmish line being deployed out, extending a little wider than the battle did, passing through a thicket of small locusts, where Brown, orderly sergeant of Company B, was killed, we advanced on towards the breastworks. On and on, I made up my mind to die. It felt glorious. We pressed forward until I heard a terrific roar of battle open on our right. Cleburne's division was charging their works. I passed on until I got to their works and over on the Yankee side. But in 50 yards of where I was, the scene was lit up by fires that seemed like hell itself. It appeared to be but one line of streaming fire. Our troops were upon one side of the breastworks and the Federals on the other. I ran up on the line of works where our men were engaged. Dead soldiers filled the entrenchment. The firing was kept up until after midnight, and then gradually died out. We passed the night where we were, but when the morrow's sun began to light up the eastern sky with its rosy hues, we looked over the battlefield. Oh my God, what did we see? It was a grand holocaust of death. Death had held high carnival there that night. The dead were piled on one another all over the ground. I was never so horrified and appalled in my life. Horses, like men, had died game on gory breastworks. General Adams' horse had his forefeet on one side of the works and his hind feet on the other, dead. The general seems to have been caught so that he was held onto the horse's back, sitting almost as living, riddled and mangled and torn with balls. General Cleburne's mare had her forefeet on top of the works, dead in that position. General Cleburne's body was pierced with 49 bullets through and through. General Straw's horse lay by the roadside, and the general by his side, both dead, and all of his staff. General Gist, a noble and brave cavalier from South Carolina, was lying with his sword, reaching across the breastworks, still grasped in his hand. He was lying there dead. All dead. They sleep in the graveyard yonder at Ashwood, almost in sight of my home where I'm writing this today. They sleep the sleep of the brave. We love and cherish their memory. They sleep beneath the ivy-mantled walls of St. John's Church where they expressed a wish to be buried. The private soldier sleeps where he fell, piled in one mighty heap. 4,500 privates, all lying side by side in death. 13 generals were killed and wounded. 4,500 men slain, all piled and heaped together in one place. I cannot tell the number of others killed and wounded. God alone knows that. We'll all find on the morning of the final resurrection. Kind friends, I have attempted in my poor and feeble way to tell you of this. I can hardly call it a battle. It should be called by some other name. But like all others' battles, it too has gone into history. I leave it with you. I don't know who's to blame. It lives in the memory of the poor old rebel soldiers who went through that trying and terrible ordeal. We shed a tear for the dead. They're buried and forgotten. We meet no more on earth, but up yonder beyond the sunset and the night, away beyond the clouds and tempest, away beyond the stars that ever twinkle and shine in the blue vault above us, away yonder by the great white throne and by the river of life, where the almighty and eternal God sits, surrounded by the angels and archangels. And the redeemed of earth, we will meet again and see those noble and brave spirits who gave up their lives for their country's cause that night at Franklin, Tennessee. A life given for one's country is never lost. It blooms again beyond the grave in a land of beauty and love. Hanging around the throne of sapphire and gold, a rich garland awaits the coming of him who died for his country. And when the horologe of time has struck its last note upon his dying brow, justice hands the record of life to mercy, and mercy pleads with Jesus, and God, for his sake, receives him in his eternal home beyond the skies at last and forever. Oh, I got plenty of space left. Tell me about Sam Watkins deserting.
I don't know much about him. All I know is that after the Battle of Nashville, we think it was after the Battle of Nashville. It could have been after this battle. He deserted. So he wasn't even in the army for the rest of the time, until the army surrendered. But yeah. In all fairness, I'm not criticizing this man at all, because by this point they were tired, they were hungry, they were overwhelmed. You're miles from home and you're like, well, do I want to go to South Carolina or do I want to go home? And you make the decision. You know, they knew it was over. The soldiers knew it was over before the government accepted it was over and made that decision. These men, they didn't have shoes, they didn't have enough food, they were close to home, and they left. But I think it's interesting because he's such an iconic sort of heroic figure here. And, you know, like, if you tell somebody, like, you know, he deserted, right? And people are like, no,
not Sam
you know,
Watkins.
it's like this tragic, you know, and I'm like, don't feel, he deserved to go home. He deserved to go home. He'd fought a long time. There was actually, after the Battle of Nashville, there was mass exodus from the Army of Tennessee, because the Tennessee boys, when you know, Davis is like, oh, we're going to send you over to the Carolinas, the Texas boys are like, oh, that is the wrong direction. You know, the Tennessee boys, they're already home. So it's not like they were completely without soldiers, but it was a moment where it was like, you make a decision, and we're tired, we're hungry, we want to go home. Sam Watkins went home because the boy was tired. He just didn't say that in his memoir because that's not heroic and brave. No, he deserted. He went home. He deserved it. Don't criticize him for it. He just was tired.
No,
he wanted to go home.
I
What was he,
understand.
18? He was a teenage boy, right?
He was a pup, yeah.
Yeah, he was just a baby. Send that baby home. It's just, I think sometimes people, like, we get these ideas in our hearts and we want to have these, like Todd Carter, for God's sake, out here charging, like when they tell the stories, charging up to save his family. And I'm like, good God, can you imagine being one of these soldiers right here and you see this man charging up towards you and you're like, well, what are you going to do? Right? So he's shot multiple times.
And that was Sam Watkins' account of the Battle of Franklin in Company H. I'd like to give a special thank you to the Battle of Franklin Trust and all the just amazing people there, and Christy for telling me about the possible desertion of Sam Watkins. Anyway, if you like this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe. I appreciate you listening again to Sam Watkins' account of the Battle of Franklin in his book, Company H.